Okay, today we're going to do that for the Gimel Pesachim and for the Gimel base. We're starting on the two dots at the top of the page. I'm going to be said in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says there's a sign to know when to stop eating chametz. In Masechta, in the Rabbi, they would put two challah breads, two breads of challah, of lachme teda, of lakabanis, and when it came to the time to stop eating chametz, they would take away one of the challahs, and when it came to time to burn the chametz, they would take away the second challah. So like this, someone was able to see the Rabbi, was able to see where these challahs were, and was able to just look out his window. Remember, they didn't have any clocks in those days, so it was pretty hard to find the exact time. So he was able to look out his window and see when they took out the challahs, if there were two challahs there, the challah there, and so forth. So we said like this: Tana ve'ed amr Yehuda shtei chalas. Tana kamed Yehuda. We learned a Tana, one Tana said in the name of Yehuda, that they put, where did they put the chalas? Agabe hoitztab. They put it on top of a stool. So the Gemara thought itztab means a stool. So the obvious question is, what does it help if they put chalas on top of the stool? If you have a random stool hanging around the Rabbi, who could see the stool? Amarle v'chila it's neotzarich. He takes out the chalas not to hide them. In other words, he dafka put it in a place that wasn't visible. The whole point of his chalas is that they should be visible. So what does the help putting them on top of the stool? So he answered him that instead of saying he put it on top of the stool, he meant he put it al gag or itztaba. He put it on the roof of the itztaba. Itztaba can mean a stool. Itztaba could mean a structure. We're going to see in a second. Then the Beis Hamikdash and Harbais, so they had two long corridors, two long structures on each side of the Harbais, and they would put the chalas on top of these things, so everyone could see them. Amar Achva Amar Yehuda, Harabais Stav Kafel. The Harabais was built with two lines of stalls on each side of the Harabais, inside the walls. A line inside of a line, meaning they will have two lines of stalls there. It says these stalls were used for how you could see them in the pictures of the Rabbi's. So they would use these stalls for different things. They would use them to store things. They would use on sukkahs. They would use them to hang up the lavim, and also it was a place that they would use for shelter for rain. It wasn't a stone. It was more like a hut, not a hut. It was two long lines that had a shelter. So these places people would usually come for shelter of rain or of the sun, or just to hang out. So therefore, if it was a tall structure, so they would put the chalas on top of them, so everyone would be able to see. Says the Mishnah, says the Gemara following the Gemara comments on what we said in the Mishnah. In Mishnah said that the Rabbi said they would put two chali teda, two breads of the teda carbon. So in the Mishnah said they were pasul. The lashon of Yehuda was shtei chalish al teda psules, pasul de chalas. Says the Gemara, amai psules. Why in the world? Why would they put nafka pasul de chalas? What's wrong with putting normal chalas? How would they find pasul de chalas? So Amar of Chanina said, "Miteich shahayim rubes nisalas belina." Since on the Erev Pesach, or the day before Erev Pesach, a lot of people were bringing the carbon teda, and since a lot of people were bringing the carbon teda, so there were a lot of karbanos to bring, and they didn't have enough time. The people didn't have enough time to eat their bread, and therefore they were pasul belina. Belina means you can't leave a carbon left over overnight, and that was on Yud Gimel. So Yud Al in the morning they had a lot of spare bread in the Beis Hamikdash, so that's where they used it as a simon for chametz. The Tanya, why was there a lot of bread on Erev Pesach? Tanya learned the Brayso in Mevin Teda b'Chag Pesach. We can't bring a carbon teda on Chag Pesach on Pesach. Why? Because the lechem of the teda, the bread, the teda was a carbon you brought usually a lamb, and together with the lamb you have to bring lachme teda. You have to bring bread with the carbon. So obviously you can't bring bread inside the Beis Hamikdash on Pesach. So the Brayso says you can't bring this carbon teda on Pesach. You have to wait to either before Pesach or after Pesach. Says the Gemara Pshita, obviously you can't bring chametz. So I need the Brayso to tell me that you can't bring the carbon teda because that's bread. So Amar Avada Barava Hacha Barba Saraskina. The Brayso is telling you a sigman out of Pesach. Kasava im vin kachin Beis Psul. The Brayso is telling you cannot bring chametz. You can't bring the carbon teda even on Erev Pesach. Why would they not be able to bring the carbon teda on Erev Pesach? Because since Erev Pesach, I hardly have any time to eat chametz. Yeah, until the 5th hour, according to Yehuda. So therefore, it's very common that I'm not going to have enough time, and I'm not going to be able to eat the bread. And once I don't eat the bread, then I'm going to have to get rid of the bread, and we avoid getting rid of bread which is holy. So therefore, on Yudalid, no one should bring carbon teda. On Pesach, forget about it. Sure, you should bring carbon teda. Even on Yudalid, you should bring carbon teda, because on Yudalid, if you're going to have bread, then you might have enough time to eat it, and therefore you're going to have to get rid of it. Everyone agrees that on Yud Gimel Nisim, which is a day before Pesach, you're able to bring a carbon teda. So everyone chaptarain to bring any teda, any Thanksgiving offering anyone had to bring this in English. He knew that 8 days he won't be able to bring. So he rushed to bring it on Yud Gimel. So therefore, a lot of people brought the carbon on Yud Gimel, and there were extra. Since a lot of people brought the carbon, there was a lot of bread, and it was too long, too much time to consume. So therefore, they became puzzle belino. They became puzzle by staying overnight. So on Yudal in the morning, they had quite a few bread, quite an amount of bread in Mesa Mikdash, which is puzzle to eat. So we use this bread to make it as a simon for the chametz. Since there was a lot of bread, so it got puzzle. There wasn't enough kahanim people to eat the bread, so therefore it got puzzle by staying overnight. That was all Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Yehuda said that the bread was lafka puzzle. Said more further, Mishum Rabbi Yamno. They said Rabbi Yana said, no, they weren't puzzle like a bread. They were kosher, meaning these breads of Teda that we use as a simon were kosher. If they're kosher, so if they're kosher, why is it in the Mishnah that they're apostle? How do you fit that together? Says the Gemara, the reason why they're apostle is not because something happened to this bread that made it apostle. It's not because they stayed overnight so the bread became apostle. It's because the bread comes together with another carbon. Now the problem is, what if you don't bring that carbon? What if for whatever reason, it's a lamb, so you have to bring a lamb and some bread. What if for whatever reason the lamb gets lost, or you don't bring the lamb to Beis Hamikdash? So if you don't bring the lamb, so then the bread also becomes pasuk. Why? Because it was holy. It was already mukdash. It was already holy from Mizbeach. On the other hand, you can't bring it. You can't eat it or bring it in the Beis Hamikdash either, because it only comes together with the lamb, and the lamb you didn't bring. So therefore, that's why they were pasuk. So they weren't pasuk because something happened to them that became pasuk. They were pasuk because of a outside occurrence that happened, that the lamb they were supposed to come with got lost. It's a one-off case. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? V'nishchet, find the lamb and shecht it. What does it mean? That we never shechted the carbon with it. Find the carbon and shecht it. So the Gemara, what do you mean? The carbon got lost, and therefore you can't find it. Says the Gemara, who cares if the carbon got lost? So bring another lamb and shecht it instead. Find another lamb, a replacement. Says the Gemara, no, it's not so simple to find a replacement for the lamb, because the person who brought the lamb, the person who brought the carbon, the Amar, when he was makdish behema, he said, Zu teida v'zu lachma. This animal is the carbon teida, and this bread is the bread for the carbon teida. So since he said this bread, so it becomes possible. You can't replace it because he said this animal, another animal wasn't holy, so therefore you can't bring another animal on the mizbeach. Okay, the Rabbi, like we said by Rabbi, the Amar Rabbi said, Avat halechem, if the bread gets lost, maybe lechem achi, you could bring another piece of bread. But of the teida, if the animal gets lost, maybe teida. You can't bring another animal. My time, why? Because lechem galal teida. The bread comes for the animal. But the animal doesn't come for the bread, meaning the bread is a part of the animal. And therefore, if the animal gets lost, the bread is useless. But if the bread gets lost, you can still bring the animal. So the bread is dependent on the animal, but the animal is independent of the bread. So therefore, if the bread gets lost, you can still bring the animal. So in this case, where the animal got lost, so you can't bring another one because you said that this animal should be on the mizbeach, and you can't bring the bread because the animal got lost. So therefore, the bread also is possible. Said the Gemara, why is this possible? There's another option to make the bread kosher by redeeming it. Since even if something's hektish, you can redeem it. What do you mean you can redeem it? You can take money and redeem the hektish for the money, and now the money becomes holy and the hektish becomes chulin. So there's still a way to be makir this bread if you redeem it. If you redeem this bread, then you could bring the bread on mizbeach. Why do we say that? In other words, we're trying to figure out a case. How are they possible? So we answer the pasuk as animal got lost. Even if the animal got lost, there's still a way they could be kosher if you redeem the bread. So we have to change the case. The case wasn't that the animal got lost. The case was that the animal got brought on mizbeach, and they shechted it, and they got the blood. But for whatever reason, the kohen was accepting the blood, by mistake spilled the blood. Since the kohen by mistake spilled the blood, so now the carbon becomes nullified because you have to switch the blood on the mizbeach. If the blood pours out before you get to the mizbeach, so now the carbon becomes pasul. And since the carbon became pasul, the bread also becomes pasul. So there's no other way of being machshir this bread, because this bread, if it's before you brought the carbon, so there's a way to redeem it. But once you shechted the carbon, the bread is part of the carbon. And since the bread is part of the carbon, so that you already shechted the carbon, you can't redeem the bread. It's as if half the bread was brought up already. Because half the carbon was brought up already. You already started the process of the carbon. On the other hand, you can't bring out the bread because the carbon wasn't brought up fully. Something happened in the way. So therefore, these carbon tether are possible. Ukaman. And who does this shit go according to? Rabbi. This goes according to Rabbi. Why? What did Rabbi say? Amar Rabbi said, Shnei dvarim hamatirin mailin zeh beloy zeh. There's two things that are matter a carbon. On the other hand, mailin zeh beloy zeh, even though they don't depend on each other. What does it mean? We're going to explain in a second. The time we learn a brayso like this. Kifsei atzeres, the two lambs that we bring on Shavuos. On Shavuos we bring two lambs, and we bring a few lambs for a carbon on Shavuos. And together with the lamb, you also bring bread. It's called shtei alechem. You bring a carbon of lamb, and also you bring bread. So what if you have lamb and bread? So the Rabbi says, the only way the bread becomes holy, meaning the only time the bread now is part of the carbon, is after the carbon is shecht. Ketzah. What does that mean? Shachtan. If you shechted the carbon, lishman, for the sake of bringing a carbon, v'zarak damon lishman, and you threw the blood for the sake of bringing the carbon, then kiddush alechem. So if you do these two, there's two things that have to be done for a carbon in order for the bread to be holy. Number one, has to be shechted for the carbon, not shechted stamazeh. And number two, it has to be the blood has to be thrown on the mizbeach for the namesake of the carbon. I mean, you have kavanah, it's for this carbon, and then only then does the bread become holy. Shachtan shalei lishman. What if you shechted the carbon shalei lishman? I mean, you shechted the carbon shtei alechem for a carbon teda, for example, or for a carbon chatas. So you had in mind to shech the animal for a different carbon that this is not the carbon. And so too, v'zarak dam shalei lishman. And if you threw the blood, you threw the blood with having kavanah that it should be for a carbon oila, for example, the bread isn't holy. Since the bread isn't holy, so that it's not part of the carbon. What if shachtan lishman? If you shechted the carbon lishman, and you shechted the carbon for the carbon of Shavuos, but you threw the blood shalei lishman. So you shechted the carbon for being a carbon shtei alechem. When you threw the blood that it should be for carbon oil, for example. So what do we do now? Okay, so if you bring both the shema, so then the bread becomes holy. If you do these two actions, shalei lishma, so the bread is not holy. What if you do one lishma? Yeah, you shech the lishma, but you threw the blood to lishma. So Rabbi says, lachem kaddish, the bread now becomes holy. Why? Meaning holy doesn't mean holy doesn't mean muktish. Holy means that it's called kedushas haguf. I mean, you can't redeem it anymore. Lachem kaddish, lachem is holy. But on the other hand, ain't a kaddish. On the other hand, it's not holy. Why is it not holy? You can't eat it. In other words, the bread is now hekdesh, but you can't eat it. Why can't you eat it? Because the carbon that was brought with is possible. So the kedusha was chal. The kedusha fell onto the bread because you shachted lishma. On the other hand, since the carbon was shalei lishma, when you threw the blood was shalei lishma, so now the bread doesn't have any carbon to hang on to because if you throw the blood shalei lishma, the carbon is possible. So the bread is like hanging in the air, basically. It's not. On the one hand, the bread itself is holy. On the other hand, you can't eat it because it only becomes permissible to eat after you throw the blood, and over you didn't throw the blood properly. So that's Rabbi's opinion, and that fits very well with what we just said before. So we're saying that if you, if the blood after you shech the carbon properly, then the blood got lost. or the blood fell out of the cup, whatever it was, so then the bread now becomes possible. Why? Because on the one hand, you shechted it, so the bread now, you can't redeem it anymore because the bread now is holy itself. It's like a sefer. On the other hand, it's not edible, it's possible because the carbon has no carbon to hang on to, because the carbon that was supposed to hang on to is nullified. That's Rabbi's opinion. Rabbi Shimon says, and he's a gam lishman. Bread never becomes holy. Bread never becomes like a carbon unless you side throw the blood lishma and side shech the carbon lishma. But if even one of these actions was shalei lishma, so then you could redeem the bread, and the bread doesn't become possible. So basically, I have an argument in Beleza and Rabbi. Rabbi says if there's two avedas that are negate to carbon. The first one is to throw the shech the carbon, and the second one is to throw the blood. So Rabbi says even if I only do one of these, okay, then the bread becomes possible. According to Rabbi Lezer, the bread only becomes possible if I do both of the actions shalei lishma. So we see over here that the statement we said before, that the reason why the chal is taid on the time of the Erev Pesach was possible was because he shechted the carbon and then the blood got lost. Goes according to the opinion of Rabbi. Because if it goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Lezer Shimon, the bread would still not be possible, because even though I lost the blood, I still shechted the carbon lishma. So therefore, the bread isn't possible. Says the Gemara, really, I could say in Tana we try to say it goes according to Rabbi. The Gemara goes deeper and says, like even say it goes according to Rabbi Lezer. So if it goes according to Rabbi Lezer, why is the bread Passover? Once you shech the carbon, there's no chance of the bread becoming Passover again. Says the Gemara, this case is talking about that you makabel the dam, you makabel the blood in a cup. We're not speaking over here that when you shech the animal, the blood just spritched all over the place and it never went into a cup. Over here, speaking about that you makabel the dam in the cup. After the blood came into the cup, then you spilled the cup by mistake. What does that help? Because Rabbi Lezer, Reb Shimon, Rabbi Lezer Shimon was like his father. His father was Reb Shimon. And Reb Shimon says, anything which is ready to be thrown, it's as if that it's thrown. It's as if it's thrown already. So now, okay, so you have blood in a cup. Reb Shimon says the stat of this cup isn't blood inside the cup. It's as if I threw the blood on this Mizbeach already. And therefore, since the blood of the Korban Todah was already inside the cup, so the blood, so in this case, the bread becomes holy, even though Rabbi Lezer usually says that in order for the bread to become a Kaddish, you have to throw the blood in the Mizbeach. And in this case, you never threw the blood in the Mizbeach. But this case is different, because over here, you never threw the blood in the Mizbeach, but the blood was in the cup already. And since the blood was on the cup already, so it's as if it was thrown already. And if it's as if it was thrown, so then the bread becomes holy. And once the bread becomes holy, you can't redeem it anymore. On the other hand, you can't eat it anymore. So therefore, it's called lechem pasol. The bread is pasol, and that's what we use to put on the base of mikdash. Says the Gemara further. Tana mishum Rabbi Lezer. We're just finishing off this concept. Tana mishum Rabbi Lezer amnu. We learned in the Brayso that said in the name of Rabbi Lezer, kasher sayu. The bread that we used for the sign was kosher, meaning there was no problem with it. Calls man shayu menachos, and this has no connection to what we said before. Calls man shayu menachos. These bread all the time, they were outside the Beis Hamikdash, so everyone would eat chametz. We should eat lachas mehem when the Kohanim took one of these breads away, toilins, then we stop eating chametz, and we don't eat, but we don't burn it yet. We just wait. Once the Kohanim took away both chalas, everyone will start burning the chametz. And the Gemara finishes off. Tanya we don't embrace it, so we just bring out different opinions of how it worked. So we had opinion now, according to Rabbi Yehuda said that the lechem was possible. We have another opinion we just said now. Rabbi Lezer said that the bread, the sign was with bread, but the bread was kosher. And we bring one more opinion. Tanya Abba Shalom says the sign wasn't with bread, but to begin with, there was no bread over there. What was the sign? They had two calves that were plowing in Har Mishcha. Har Mishcha is Har Zeisim, which is very close to Har Bayis. So before Pesach they would put two cows there to plow. If the cows are still plowing, everyone would still be able to eat chametz. If Chacham took away one of the cows, so then everyone would stop eating chametz, and they wouldn't eat, but they won't burn it. When they took away both cows, so it's chiluk olam seif, and everyone would start burning their chametz. So we're going to stop over here at Vidal and Midalef. The next sugya, the next few amudim, is a very interesting piece of Gemara. It's called the sugya of Reb Chanina Skan HaKainim. It's a witness, basically. It's a witness of Reb Chanina of exactly how it worked in the Beis Hamikdash, different din in the Beis Hamikdash. It's a very interesting piece. We'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem. Have a good night.